We've now worked our way through all of the miniatures in the first box of the Elden Ring board game, the Weeping Peninsula expansion. And not only that, I've also had time to play through the first campaign, at least for the first time. So this Tarnished Tuesday, why don't we sit down and do a little bit of a retrospective into my final thoughts as we close the lid on the Weeping Peninsula. So let's start off with what the Weeping Peninsula box actually is. I call it an expansion because it's not the core set, but really it's more of an alternate starting point. As the name would imply, it focuses on the Weeping Peninsula area of Elden Ring, from the Bridge of Sacrifice all the way south to Castle Morn. We'll talk about the narrative elements a little bit later, but for now I'll just say that the board game actually does a pretty good job of capturing the area, enemies, and quest lines of the Weeping Peninsula. With the smaller scope of this box, the Weeping Peninsula offers a bit more of a concise and straightforward way to start learning the game. That said, it still does include the full core rules, so you're not losing anything by starting here instead of the core set. It's just a more concise and slightly more tailored way to start learning those rules. And speaking of rules and mechanics, why don't we start there? I don't get to talk about gameplay much on this channel, which is something that I'd like to change, but for a review it feels kinda mandatory. The Weeping Peninsula is played through a series of scenarios. These are kind of like chapters, and come in a few varieties. Narrative scenarios are kinda like those choose-your-own adventure stories that we all read as kids. It's a second-person story format that follows how your Tarnished would explore the world. You'll be confronted with obstacles, forking paths, and even a few enemies. There are some limited stakes, but these sections are mostly there to progress the story. Then there are exploration scenarios, and these are probably my favorite. In these sections, you'll use the included map tiles to explore a map that's generated as you explore it, with tiles randomly selected from a shuffled stack. There could be anything on this map, NPCs, enemy encounters, items to pick up, you name it. To me, these feel like the core of the gameplay experience. Then there are combat scenarios. These come in a couple different flavors, but are more or less the same. Gauntlets are several waves of mostly smaller enemies. Dungeons are similar, but lead up to a larger enemy or boss at the end. Then there are the boss fights, where a Tarnished faced off against a single monster with a much larger health pool. Like I said, the exploration scenarios were probably my favorite. It still does include some enemy encounters, so you still get a little bit of the combat, but the exploration and item management mechanics were definitely more interesting to me. But importantly, this scenario format allows the game to be played as you wish. You don't have to dedicate an entire weekend to playing this board game, instead you can just do small bite-sized chunks every evening. And whenever you complete one of these scenarios, all you have to do is store all of the selected upgrades and materials and stuff that you collected in one of the card slots in the core box. This basically lets you pause between scenarios, letting you take the campaign into bite-sized chunks instead of one whole runtime. And while I do personally prefer the exploration scenarios, the combat encounters do have a lot to them as well. There's a whole lot of depth there into how the mechanics work, and each class will play a little bit differently. But as much fun as I've been having with this game, I do have a couple criticisms. Firstly, throughout the game you'll run into hardships. These are cards that you'll draw to represent an enemy, obstruction, or challenge for your Tarnished to face. Most require you to match a value using your class's attributes. The only problem is that these hardships seemed specifically geared towards one type of class. You may have some that are better for strength build and some that are better for intelligence builds, for example. And the problem is, if you're playing a strength build, for example, you may draw a card meant for an intelligence build, and in those cases, there's just basically nothing you can do to complete that scenario. We never really ran into ones that were close at all. It was either super easy or literally impossible for the class that we had. You can level up your character and change your attributes a little bit, sure, but if I'm playing a strength class, I don't want to have to spec into intelligence just to pass hardships. It feels antithetical to the class that I chose. And while I'm not saying that these hardships should be easy across the board, quite the opposite, I think that as they exist now, it's more just like busy work with a penalty as opposed to a fully realized game mechanic. While that's a problem with the game system as a whole, I did also have one criticism of the Weeping Peninsula box in particular. With the limited scope of the box, sometimes things get a little repetitive. There's only so many Misbegotten that you can fight before it starts becoming the same. Each Misbegotten has their own attacks and behaviors, but still, their core functions are the same. Sure, it's accurate to the game, but some more variety would have been nice. But in the end, I found most of the core mechanics engaging enough to keep the lack of variety from being a deal breaker to me. Now I do want to take just a minute to talk about the narrative here, because the board game actually does a pretty good job of encapsulating the Weeping Peninsula experience from the video game onto the tabletop. You'll notice landmarks, enemy encounters, and NPCs that appear here just as they do in the video game, and it's a really nice touch. Without getting into spoilers, in case this is your first exposure to Elden Ring, the Castle Morn storyline is rendered pretty well. And if you have played the game, you'll be able to keep a pretty clear mental image of exactly where you'd be in the video game. But now, for the reason that you probably found this channel in the first place, the miniatures. In this box, you get 20 of them. 6 Misbegotten, 4 Rotten Strays, 3 Winged Misbegotten, 2 Scaly Misbegotten, 1 Leonine Misbegotten, and the playable classes Astrologer, Hero, Prophet, and Bandit. All of these miniatures are in soft PVC, which makes them pretty durable and resistant to breaking, though some warpage may occur. They take paint just like any miniature and are pretty well detailed as far as board game minis go. Details are about as crisp as I've seen on any PVC miniature, and the texture is rendered well enough that you could paint these guys with only dry brushing if you really wanted. Now, you might notice that despite me running a painting YouTube channel, most of these guys are still unpainted. Part of that reason is because I run a painting channel and I don't have much time for free painting. But also, it comes down to the scope of the box again. 12 out of the 20 miniatures that you get are misbegotten. Even if there's a different variety, a Muppet is still a Muppet, and there's only so many you can paint before it just kind of becomes boring. Not to mention, a lot of the repeat miniatures are identical sculpts, which, don't get me wrong, is not unheard of for board games, but it does kind of make it hard to muster up the motivation to paint another 5 Muppets. The characters and the boss included are great though, and I had a ton of fun painting them up. The characters are much smaller than I'm used to, so that made them a little tricky, but at that scale it's more about giving the impression the detail than anything else. So overall, if I were to give this box an arbitrary score on the miniatures, it would probably be about a 6 or a 7. This is the only way to get misbegotten, so it's cool that they're here, but that's pretty much all you get. But that brings us to the crux of this video. Do I recommend picking this box up? Well, unfortunately that depends. It is a whole $120 US, at least as MSRP goes. For that pretty steep price tag, you do get quite a bit of board game peripheral stuff though, in addition to all the miniatures. So who would I recommend to pick this box up? Well, I think there are 2 groups of people. Firstly are just big fans of Misbegotten. I'm sure there are a few of you out there. And secondly are the people that want to try this game without jumping in for the full core box. 120 is still steep to try out a board game, but I'm sure there are discount retailers out there that'll soften that blow. So if you just want to try this game system out, check it off the checklist, and then put it on the shelf, Weeping Peninsula is probably the box for you. But otherwise, I would actually recommend people pick up the full Realm of the Grafted King core box instead. It is $80 more expensive, which is definitely steep as well. However, for that extra money, you get 34 extra miniatures. A lot of those miniatures are also larger than the ones that come in the Weeping Peninsula box. And you do get the entire gameplay experience with a lot more varied enemies and exploration types. All that said though, I did have fun painting and playing this box. It's just kind of poised as the cheaper starter alternative, without actually having a cheaper price tag. So this time, maybe go for the core box instead and then come back to Weeping Peninsula to complete the collection. But that said, if you've picked this box up for yourself, let me know what you think in the comments. I've already continued my campaign from the Weeping Peninsula into the core box, so there should be more Elden Ring content coming in the future. Until then, I hope this video was able to answer some of your Elden Ring questions. If you have any others, make sure to drop in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. Subscribe and turn notifications on so you don't miss the next one, and until we meet again friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow.